Ladies, let's be real for a second. When a man ignores you, it can feel like rejection, confusion, even disrespect. But here's the truth: his silence isn't power, it's weakness. Because the greatest weakness of a man who ignores you is that he underestimates the value of your presence. And once he does that, everything changes. For him, not for you. Today, I'm going to break down exactly why his silence says more about him than it ever will about you. When a man ignores you, the first thing I want you to remember is this: silence does not equal strength. It feels powerful in the moment, right? Like he's in control, like he's holding all the cards because he's not responding, he's not showing his hand, he's not giving you anything to hold on to. But underneath that quiet is something most people overlook: insecurity. A man who is secure, a man who is confident in himself and in the relationship, doesn't have to pull away or shut down to feel strong. He knows that real strength is in communication, in showing up, in being present even when things feel uncomfortable. So when he chooses silence instead of honesty, you're not looking at control, you're looking at fear. Think about it. Ignoring you isn't about him being too busy, too distracted, or even too uninterested. It's about him not knowing how to handle you, how to face the truth, how to manage his own emotions without shutting down. Ignoring becomes the easiest escape route for someone who doesn't have the courage to step into a real conversation. That's insecurity, that's weakness. And the dangerous part is, he may not even realize he's doing it. He tells himself it's strategy, he tells himself he's making you chase, but what he's really doing is exposing his inability to meet you at the level of maturity you deserve. And here's the kicker: a man who is truly strong, truly grounded, doesn't need to ignore you to feel wanted. He doesn't need to punish you with absence just to prove a point. He knows his value, and he shows it by staying engaged. The one who ignores you, he's afraid. Afraid that if he engages, he'll have to admit fault. Afraid that if he speaks, you might see through him. Afraid that if he faces you head on, he won't measure up. Silence becomes his shield, but it's also his downfall, because all it does is reveal what's lacking inside of him. Now I know when you're on the receiving end, it doesn't feel like he's weak. It feels like you're the one losing. You're the one questioning. You're the one wondering, what did I do wrong? Why won't he just say something? But I want you to flip that perspective. Ask yourself this: what kind of strength does it take to ignore someone who cares about you? What kind of courage is there in running from a conversation? What kind of man hides behind silence when words could heal, when words could connect, when words could bring clarity? That's not power. That's avoidance. And avoidance always has its roots in insecurity. The man who ignores you is telling on himself without even realizing it. He's saying, I don't know how to handle you. I don't know how to handle me. I don't know how to handle this. And the beauty in that realization is you get to see clearly who he really is. Because anyone can be charming when they're talking, when they're giving attention, when things are light and easy. But true character shows up when the pressure is on. His choice to ignore doesn't reveal your weakness. It reveals his. So instead of letting that silence break you, let it inform you. Let it remind you that the man who cannot communicate, who cannot stay present, who cannot deal with his own emotions without retreating, is not a man standing in strength. He's a man hiding in fear. And once you see it for what it is, you stop blaming yourself for his silence, and you start recognizing that his ignoring has nothing to do with your worth and everything to do with his weakness. That is the greatest truth about his silence. It never hides strength, it only exposes insecurity. When a man chooses to ignore you, one of the clearest things it reveals is how much he overestimates his value while underestimating yours. He thinks that by pulling away, by going quiet, he's putting himself in a position of power. He assumes his absence is going to make you run toward him, that you'll bend, you'll break. You'll chase just to get his attention again. But what he fails to see is that this arrogance, this false sense of importance, is the very thing that costs him the most. He convinces himself that you need him more than he needs you. He believes that because he's silent, you're automatically sitting there waiting for him to come back around. And here's the truth: some women do wait. Some women get trapped in that cycle of hoping, overthinking, and questioning, what did I do wrong? When will he come back? And for a moment, it makes him believe that he really does have the upper hand. But the reality is, overestimating his role in your life blinds him to the fact that you actually have choices, you have value, and you have the strength to walk away. That's where the tables turn. See, a man who ignores you assumes his presence is irreplaceable. He thinks his silence is some kind of currency, like he can spend it, and it will make him more desirable. But silence isn't value. Presence is value. Effort is value. Consistency is value. And when he underestimates what you bring to the table, when he overlooks your worth, he makes a mistake that is nearly impossible to undo. Because once you recognize that your life does not pause for his absence, once you realize that his ignoring is not a reflection of you, but a reflection of him, the hold he thought he had on you disappears. This is the part he doesn't see. He doesn't realize that by ignoring you, he's teaching you to live without him. Every unanswered call, every text left hanging, every moment of silence is another opportunity for you to remind yourself that you're fine on your own. You adapt. You grow stronger. You find peace where he thought you'd find desperation. And the longer he underestimates your strength, the more he overestimates his own importance. The deeper he digs the hole he's standing in. And here's the irony: when a man ignores you, he thinks you start chasing him. But what usually happens is the opposite. The more you sit with that silence, the more you see clearly. You start to realize that someone who can't recognize your value doesn't deserve access to it. He's banking on your weakness, but instead, he awakens your strength. He thinks he's proving that he's the prize, but what he's actually doing is showing you he's not worth the fight. A man who truly understands his worth never has to diminish yours to prove it. He knows that the relationship is stronger when both people are valued, when both people are respected, when both people show up. But the man who ignores you, he's playing a game where the only person he outsmarts is himself. Because no matter how much he overestimates his value, the truth will always come out in the end when he realizes he underestimated yours. And that realization will cost him everything he thought he controlled. When a man ignores you, he tells himself that distance will somehow make you crave him more. He believes that by stepping back, by being unavailable, by withholding his presence, you'll feel an emptiness that only he can fill. But what he doesn't understand is that distance doesn't always create desire. More often, it creates doubt. And once doubt enters the picture, the foundation of connection starts to crack in ways he never expected. At first, you might notice the silence and think, maybe he's just busy. Maybe he's processing. Maybe he needs space. You give him the benefit of the doubt because that's what caring people do. They assume the best. But over time, silence doesn't feel like space anymore. It feels like neglect. It feels like avoidance. And that's when the questions begin to creep in. Why isn't he showing up? Why doesn't he value this the way I do? If he really cared, would he treat me this way? Those questions are the beginning of doubt, and once doubt takes root, desire isn't what grows, distance is. See, desire is fueled by connection. It's fueled by the consistency of knowing someone is there, that they're invested, that they care enough to communicate even when it's uncomfortable. When that consistency disappears, desire doesn't have room to thrive. What replaces it is uncertainty, and uncertainty makes you second guess whether this is someone you can rely on, whether this is someone you even want to invest in anymore. That's the part he doesn't think about. He's so focused on making you miss him that he doesn't realize he's giving you reasons not to trust him. The human heart doesn't bond through absence. It bonds through presence. We don't grow closer to the people who disappear when things get hard. We grow closer to the ones who stay. So when he chooses to ignore you, he believes he's building tension that he's making himself more valuable in your eyes. But in reality, he's creating a version of himself that feels unreliable, unstable, and unsafe to depend on. That's not desire, that's doubt. And doubt has a way of erasing the very connection he thought he was protecting. And here's where the shift happens. Instead of leaning toward him, you start to lean away. Instead of missing him, you begin to question if he's even worth the effort. Instead of craving his attention, you realize how peaceful life can feel without the constant wondering, without the emotional roller coaster of being ignored. What he thought would pull you closer actually pushes you further. And once you've experienced the clarity that comes from doubt, once you've seen that his silence speaks louder than his presence ever did, it's nearly impossible to unsee it. He wanted to create desire, but what he built instead was distance. And here's the truth: distance doesn't just separate two people physically. It separates them emotionally. It chips away at trust, it weakens respect, and it eventually destroys the bond altogether. He thought ignoring you would prove his power, but what it really proves is that he never understood the difference between making you miss him and making you question him. And once you start questioning him, he's already lost the very thing he was trying to hold on to. When a man ignores you, it can be tempting to think that you're the one being diminished, like somehow his silence lowers your value. But here's the truth: a high-value woman can't be ignored. Not because she's loud, not because she's demanding, but because her presence speaks for itself. The man who tries to ignore her only ends up shining a spotlight on his own weakness. He reveals that he doesn't know what to do with someone who stands in her worth, someone who knows exactly who she is and what she deserves. A high-value woman doesn't chase silence. She doesn't beg for attention. She doesn't lose herself trying to force someone to recognize her. Why? Because she understands that value isn't proven by who notices it. Value exists whether or not someone acknowledges it. Think about it like this: a diamond doesn't stop being a diamond just because someone walks past it. Its worth doesn't change based on whether a person sees it or not. The same is true here. When he ignores you, he doesn't reduce your value, he only reduces his own opportunity to experience it. This is the part men don't always recognize. They think silence is control, but in reality, silence is surrender. It's giving up the chance to be present with a woman who has already done the work to know her own strength. And here's where the tables turn. The very act of ignoring only confirms what she already knows: that she is on another level, that she cannot be broken down by absence, that her worth is not dependent on anyone else's attention. And what makes this powerful is that her response to being ignored isn't desperation, it's elevation. She doesn't shrink, she grows. She doesn't chase, she pulls back with dignity. She doesn't plead for validation. She validates herself by living fully, by standing tall, by continuing to move forward. And when she does that, she proves that the silence wasn't a punishment. It was an opportunity to reveal who is truly strong and who is truly weak. Because when a man ignores a high-value woman, what he doesn't realize is that he's writing himself out of her story. She doesn't pause her life waiting for him to show up. She doesn't sacrifice her peace waiting for him to decide she's worthy of his time. She carries on, and in doing so, she highlights the difference between someone who knows their worth and someone who's still trying to find it. That contrast, it speaks volumes. Here's the irony: the more he ignores, the more obvious it becomes that she doesn't need him. The more silent he is, the more her strength stands out. The more he tries to withhold his presence, the more clear it becomes that she is the one who held the real power all along. And by the time he understands that his silence only elevated her instead of breaking her, it's usually too late. A high-value woman can't be ignored, because every attempt to silence her only amplifies her strength. When a man chooses to ignore you, he often thinks he's teaching you a lesson, as if his absence will somehow make you want him more. But the reality is, the first thing he loses isn't your attention, it's the emotional connection that held everything together in the first place. Relationships don't survive on games, they survive on connection. They thrive when two people feel safe, seen, and understood. When he pulls away, when he ignores, he chips away at that foundation little by little, until what once felt close now feels distant, and what once felt strong now feels fragile. Emotional connection is what makes you feel bonded to someone. It's built through small things, through conversations, through laughter, through being there when it matters. And the thing about connection is, it's not something you can just pause and come back to whenever you want. It needs consistency. It needs presence. So when he ignores you, when he chooses silence over communication, he starts to break that invisible thread between you without even realizing it. He might think it's just a temporary power move, but the damage he's doing runs deeper than he expects. Because what happens is, if you stop feeling safe with him, you stop trusting that he's going to show up for you when it counts. Instead of leaning into the relationship, you start pulling back emotionally, almost without trying. You begin to question whether he really cares, whether his feelings were ever as strong as he said, whether he's even capable of handling the weight of intimacy. And those questions weaken the bond in ways that are hard to repair. Once someone makes you doubt the connection, you can't just snap your fingers and go back to the same level of closeness. Something shifts. And this is where he loses the very thing that gave him meaning in your life. He thinks silence makes him look strong, but silence makes him look distant. He thinks ignoring makes him look valuable, but ignoring makes him look replaceable. Because when the connection fades, the emotional tie that made you hold on starts to loosen. And once that bond weakens, the desire to fight for the relationship weakens too. The saddest part is that most men don't see this happening until it's too late. They think they can step back in when they're ready, as if the connection will still be there waiting. But emotional intimacy doesn't work like that. If you don't feed it, it dies. If you don't nurture it, it withers. And when you've been ignored long enough, your heart begins to detach. You stop caring in the same way. You stop waiting for his response. You stop needing his presence to feel whole. And once that shift happens, the relationship he thought he controlled slips right through his fingers. He might believe that ignoring you puts you in your place, but what it really does is put him at risk of losing the most important part of the relationship, the bond. Because the truth is, no matter how much attraction there is, no matter how much history there is, without connection, it all eventually falls apart. He loses that first, long before he loses your attention, and by the time he realizes what he's done, the connection is usually gone for good. Ignoring you doesn't weaken your bond to him, it weakens his bond to you. When a man ignores you, he may think he's winning. He may think that by pulling away, by withholding his time and attention, he's somehow putting you in a position of weakness. But the truth is the opposite. Ignoring you doesn't break you. It breaks him. Because a woman who refuses to chase, who refuses to beg, who refuses to shrink herself for the sake of someone else's silence, gains something far more powerful than his attention. She gains self-respect. And once self-respect enters the picture, no amount of silence can take it away. What happens in those moments is important. At first, you might feel the sting of being ignored. You might wrestle with the questions, the uncertainty, the temptation to reach out just to get a reaction. But over time, something begins to shift. Instead of running after someone who doesn't see your value, you turn inward. You find strength in your independence. You remind yourself that you are not defined by who gives or withholds attention. That strength builds, and it becomes a foundation he can't touch. On the other side of that, his silence works against him. Because while you are building self-respect, he is losing ground. He's losing the opportunity to be with a woman who knows her worth. He's losing the connection that once made him matter. And the longer he ignores, the more he convinces you that life is actually better without the drama, without the confusion, without the constant guessing game. What he thought was power turns into loss, and that loss is one he can't undo easily. The truth is, ignoring doesn't elevate him. It isolates him. It leaves him outside of the very relationship he thought he could control. And here's where the irony comes in. While he's busy trying to prove a point by ignoring you, you're growing stronger, wiser, more confident in your ability to walk away. You're learning that his silence isn't a reflection of your worth, but a reflection of his immaturity. And that lesson, that's priceless. And when you get to that place where you stop reacting, stop chasing, stop letting his silence dictate your peace, he realizes something he never saw coming. He realizes that the power he thought he had never existed. He realizes that the silence he used to control you actually freed you. And most of all, he realizes that by ignoring you, he only managed to ignore the best thing he ever had. So in the end, his silence doesn't break your spirit, it builds it. It doesn't make you weaker, it makes you stronger. But for him, it does the opposite. Because when a man ignores a woman of value, he isn't teaching her a lesson. He's teaching himself exactly what it feels like to lose her. Ignoring you doesn't break you, it breaks him.